Welcome to the Think Generational Wealth podcast, and this is episode number 123. I am your host, Amir Estimo. Thank you for tuning in today's podcast episode, because you could be doing anything in this world, but the fact that you are listening to this podcast episode, it is much appreciated. Second of all, if you get a chance, please rate and subscribe to the podcast. The podcast drops, if you're a new listener, the podcast drops every Wednesday, 6 a.m. Central Standard Time. You will get new content from Amir Estimo and Think Generational Wealth. Okay, so let's dive in today's podcast episode. So today's podcast episode is a continuation of the previous podcast episode where I talked about a land deal that I went through, that I executed, that took me about a year and a half, but I ended up making $10,000 on this deal. Now, the second deal that I executed on, that I closed on, is this deal was actually in Iredell, North Carolina, the county of Iredell, North Carolina. And this deal came through a mailer. So the previous deal, when you are in land, when you are in real estate investing, there is multiple ways you can find leads. Some is you can send mailers, you can do cold calling, you can do texting, you can do ringless voicemail. Now the issue with each, now I'm just going to touch on this a little bit. With ringless voicemail, you want to be careful with that, because especially if you reach out to someone that is a do not disturb, let's say, or not do not disturb, or do not contact, or do not call. And let's say, for example, you reach out to them, or you bought a list and you didn't scrub your list properly, and you do a ringless voicemail. And for you who don't know what a ringless voicemail is a ringless voicemail is when you call a number, but you don't actually talk to the person. So once the person, because there's a pre-recorded message that you walk them through, and then, or that message can usually get dropped directly to their voicemail. The issue with that, again, is if they don't give you let's say they don't say, okay, hey, you can call me and whatnot, and they don't give you the consent to call them, these people can actually come back and sue you. And ringless voicemail is becoming a strategy that is actually now being heavily scrutinized, because a lot of companies they are getting away, doing these ringless voicemails, especially now, a lot of people thinking it's scam. So you want to be careful with that. Then, of course, there's texting. You can do that too. Same thing. They don't give you the consent to reach out to them, they can come back and sue you. Same thing with cold calling. And then mailing. Mailing is the same thing. Is if someone is on a do not contact list and you actually contact them with a letter, you can actually get sued and get in trouble. So, but probably the safest, but it's actually kind of expensive too, is what they call PPC, which is pay-per-click. Pay-per-click meaning that you have a website, someone actually they want to sell their property, and if they go online themselves and say, hey, they submit their information and they want to sell their property, that's probably the most safest way to do it, because they are contacting you. You are not reaching out to them. So that's probably, but the issue with that is if you, let's say someone, or it could be a competitor, and that competitor they know that, hey, you're a competitor, because for every time someone clicks your link, there's a cent that's getting charged to you. There's an amount that's getting charged. So if they sit there and click it, let's say they click, and they never even submit anything, you have to fight with, could be Google, because let's say you do a Google pay-per-click, and You have to fight with them to say, hey, this is not legitimate. This is just someone who's just playing around, whatnot. But it can get quite expensive, especially if you're not turning any leads into conversions. You're not converting these leads. Now, this deal did come from a mailer, and it was in Iredell, North Carolina. The interesting thing about this deal was, one, the deal didn't really have the property did not really have a great access. So if you had actually looked at the property itself and where it was located, the property looked like it was located in a dead end area. It didn't have a paved road. It was actually a dirt road, and it was not even, there was no road. There was no road that was actually built to this property. And on top of that, the property, it was a nice property itself. It was but the thing was is that it didn't have it didn't have what they call as maintained access, or a state road maintained access, meaning that the state is the one who's responsible. Now, if it's private road access, that means it could be whoever in that area is responsible for maintaining and keeping the road, in shape. But if you're let's say you ever buy a property and it's not state maintained, let's say it's private, more than likely most of the time it's not gonna be in the best condition. So that was the one thing about the property. But it was a nice property. It was 1 acre. There were some houses in that area. There was also electricity in the area too. The good thing about this property, though, it was not wetlands, so that was one. It was flat. It was not sloped, so that means this property was probably better for someone who wanted to build a residential home in that area. The only thing they would have needed to do was, of course, they would have to cut down the trees, and then they would have to get the property. You have to get the property tested, soil tested, to see if you can install a septic tank, or you can install a well in this area, which is what the person who bought it from me actually did. Now, this deal, I ended up double closing. I'm going to tell you the pros and the cons. Let's start with the cons. This second deal, what I did wrong in this second deal was, I bought this property. First of all, you have to learn when it comes to real estate, or probably anything in general, you have to learn how to negotiate. I did not negotiate this property. First of all, when I sent the mailer, the original offer was like $11,000 or something to that nature. As I did my due diligence, I talked to the seller. Now, the seller was a young lady. Her father, basically in a nutshell, her father was not responsible with money. And then the mom passed away. And then the father, again, was just not responsible with money. So they just needed the money to just be able to take care of some type of debt. And first of all, it was $11,500. Then I actually negotiated down the property to, I think, about $6,000 or so. Okay, like about $6,000. I got it down. In contrast, though, I should have probably got this property down to more of the range of $3,000 to $4,000, but I got it to about $6,000. Okay, so that's number one. So you look at that spread, you're looking at a $5,500 spread from the get-go. And you're still not even thinking about the taxes and other maybe improvements you do on the property, if that's what I had desired. Now, the thing was that, okay, so I got it down to about 6,000. So the spread was about 50. So I got it down to about 5,500 from the original price. But I double close, meaning when you double close, meaning you do what they call an A to B, B to C. A to B means you close with the seller, and then you turn around and sell that property to an end buyer who's the C. And you can do this, align this all in one day. But with double close, some title company, they may say, okay, hey, you can use our funding to close on this deal. Some may not. The majority is probably going to say no. But if you do that in case, you may look at options like a private lender or also a transactional lender type. So maybe when you use those two, you basically, with a private lender, depending how comfortable level, and that private lender could be anybody. It could be a friend. It could be someone, because there's a lot of people in the real estate industry that has money that they would like to deploy. But if you go that route, they're going to charge you a fee. But for me, I had the money, so I closed on this deal on my own. I not self-closed, but I used the attorney because North Carolina is an attorney state. Now, some states are attorney and attorney state, so you actually have to close with an attorney, and some states are not. Like Florida is example. It was a state that I closed the deal on that was not. You can close through a title company, and that's okay. Now, this deal, once I closed with the seller, I paid the taxes to the seller. So as an investor, you want to make sure, because when you sell them a letter, you want to say, okay, it depends however you negotiate this. Some sellers may say, okay, I'll pay the taxes. But probably 95% of these sellers are not going to say that. They're going to expect you to pay all the taxes and all the closing costs, and which came about, I think, about $1,500 or so. Now, that's okay, which is fine. But when I closed with the end buyer, I think that property, they end up buying it from me for $12,000. So if that's the case, you have 6,000, and then you put 1,500, that's already 7,500. So you only have a 4,500 spread. What I did not do correctly was I then paid whatever the closing costs on my end too, that was not correct. The end buyer should had paid all the closing costs. But this deal actually took me 3 months to sell, close to 3 to 4 months. And the only reason it took longer because the seller was basically a dinosaur. They didn't really have, they had an email, but it was very hard, to do the notarization. You actually had to get them. They had to go and do the notarization. They did not want to do an online notary. There came a point in the deal when we were getting ready, because the end buyer was ready. The end buyer got the property soil tested. They already had a plan ready to build on the property, but the seller kind of ghosted me for a little bit, and I started getting worried. I said, oh my gosh, because if the seller doesn't close with you, you can't sell it to the end buyer right away, because that title, that deed is not under your name still. So I got ghosted for about a week or two, and the end buyer already deposited the funds to the attorney, because the end buyer, whenever I do these deals, I use my title or attorney. I don't use nobody. The only time I probably use somebody else's title or attorney is if I already bought the property and I already owned the property myself. But in this case, since I was double closing, hey, these are my terms. Either you do it or not, period. So therefore, the end buyer, the seller kind of ghosted me. And then the dad was kind of acting up a little bit. So it was just so much work that was into it, meaning trying to get everything lined up, because the end buyer deposited the funds. They were ready to get this deal up and going. But the seller kind of ghosted me for a little bit, and I kind of got worried. So after a week later, I was able to get in contact with the seller. But came to find out, the daughter or something had something going on with their phone. Their phone was broke. It was just always something with these people. It was just always something. So then I ended up doing the closing, and I kind of paid the same closing costs that I paid on the seller side. So now if I basically paid $30,000, and you still got to take into account, if you sent out marketing, how much time you're putting into this property, meaning marketing the property. Also, did you get drone pictures of it? Because most of the time you want to be able to sell this property and be able to, people have the visualization of it. So that was about 3,000. So I was all in $9,000, and the taxes after everything came about, I ended up making like 2,500 or something, $2,500 on this deal. Which, number one, my mistake was I did not properly negotiate. Number one. Number two, if I had negotiated down the property a little bit more, I probably could have made $6,000. If I had got it down to about 45, because me and the daughter, we were going back and forth. When it started at 11.5, I said, hey, listen, you don't really have a good access. And on top of that, it's not cleared. And therefore here, I went with, at first I offered them like 5,000, and then going back and forth. So the property I ended up agreeing to 6,000. And when after I closed on the deal and I looked at it, because every time I close these deals, I do a self-reflection. And I said, okay, you know what did I do right? What did I do wrong? And I already saw if I had negotiated it down more, because I kind of got, I want to say I was hungry to close the deal. But if I had just showed maybe a little bit more patience and actually really negotiated, I could have got this deal maybe even $3,000 to $4,000. But because I was like, hey, you know what, they kind of need the money. I was like, you know what, let's just do this. Okay. But you always have to understand, when you do these deals, you cannot have the feelings into it. So that was another thing I did wrong. But the good thing with the property, it didn't last that long. I actually sold it in 3 to 4 months. So that was a lesson learned for this property. So number one, if you everything is negotiable in life. You can negotiate anything in life. It's just a matter of knowing how to do it. So I did not negotiate very well. So I would say that was one. And then two, I didn't understand. I'm like, wait a minute, I actually own this property. I should have had the buyer pay all the taxes, but because the deal it should have been closed in 3 months. It took close to 4 months. I just wanted to sell the property. But again, patience. Patience is a virtue. So that was my mistake of this property, that I should have just been a little bit more patient and took my time. And then also just, again, negotiate. And then you got to think about, for every hours you put into a deal and whatever you make on that end, you can make your time. You can close on a deal, and I'm going to share my next deal. This one here I would say it was a complete nightmare because it had so many title issues. But this will be another story for another podcast. And I think this will be the next one. And then I'll probably give you guys a break. And then, because I have a few more deals that I'd like to share with you guys. And the only reason I'm sharing these with you guys is to tell you that anything is possible. You can do anything. You have to have the right mindset and the right skill. And if you don't have either, then it's not going to work. And for me, when I got into the land business and I looked at it at first, I was like, I always wanted to do real estate. But however, you have to know what you're doing. And sometimes you may need to hire a mentor, which I hired a mentor, and this person was great and all, had a great program. And I learned a lot from it. Now when I reflected back on the deal, now I saw, okay, this is what I shouldn't have not done. I got too eager. I wasn't patient. And therefore, I didn't make as much money. So if you let's say you can make $100,000 on the deal, But if you put close to 100 hours into it, you have to take into account how many hours, meaning talking to buyers and sellers, marketing, and then how many hours and what was your profit to make that money. Because some deals, the deal I did last week, I talked about last week on episode 122, check it out. And I will actually link or share some of the old podcasts that you guys can refer to. But this deal was, it didn't take as long to sell, but the thing was the profit wasn't there. So that was a lesson learned for me. And the next two deals that I end up having, I end up actually making more money. But one of these deals, again, took more time. So I hope this podcast, this episode was of value to you. And again, you can do anything. If you want to start a podcast, go and start a podcast. If you want to start a business, go and start a business. Because at the end of the day, you want to leave a legacy. You want to leave a legacy. And the reason I'm sharing these deals with you, because to let you know too, the good side and the dark side of real estate investing or land and flipping. It's not as caked up as people you may see online. You see someone say, "Oh man, I made $100,000," but they don't tell you how long it took, what did they have to do, and they don't explain it to you. So everything you're seeing is at surface level, but you're not seeing all the hard work it took to make that money. And that is why I'm sharing these with you. I'm not going to come on here and tell you, hey, you know what, I made $100,000. Well, no, I made 100. Let's say I did. But then you got to share your losses too. You got to share not only just your wins, share your losses, because people can relate to that. So if any of you guys ever decide you want to get into real estate investing, you have now an understanding that, you know what, Amir shared these pitfalls. And then whatever I've shared with you, you can now not replicate and do that same mistake. Okay? Thank you for tuning into the podcast. If you enjoy the content, please rate and subscribe this podcast. I would be much appreciative. Until next week, I will share deal number 3, and I think we'll take a break from there. And then after that, we'll get back to our regularly scheduled program. Much love. Peace.